Continuing in the vein of extremely influential leaders throughout Miran history, it only seems right that we delve into the story of the most theologically significant man in Mira, Hezday, the first prophet of Yamashet. So, let's learn about his story. The first prophet was written on February 11th, 2020, as my 32nd story. It covers the humble origins of Hezday and his abrupt and surprising rise to power with the help of the gods, covering the period from about 274 to 325 LM. While the last video showcased an individual who used the gods for his own gain, this video will showcase an individual who remembered to keep the gods at the forefront of his mind, hence why he became a sort of teacher's pet, but for divine beings. Anyway, let's meet the cast. Obviously, we have Hezday, the main character. Before becoming the first prophet, he's just another little boy living in poverty somewhere on the River Nuke. Of course, there are also a couple gods in this story, the primary of which is Tule, the goddess of rivers and rain. That might seem random now, but just you wait. And, of course, our staple character, Yamashet. These are the only main characters, but there are several secondary characters, including Puzdu, the future second prophet, the priests at the Temple of Murid, and Hezday's father and mother, Palak and Sendem. Luvi also has a cameo in the story. So, with that, let's get to it. Our story takes place in the city of Murid, right here. This will be expanded on in a future video, but this is not the only instance of theological significance in this city. Anyway, Hezday is born in 274 LM to a very poor family in Murid. Palak, the father, is an alcoholic who forces himself onto Hezday's mother, Sendem. She wasn't opposed to having kids, but she wasn't quite ready yet, so they debate whether to keep him or throw him in the woods and forget he ever happened. They do keep him, naming him Hezday, which is early New Korean for origin. You could go the route of, hey, that's called foreshadowing, but it's really not, because Sendem's thought process when naming him was that he was going to be the origin of a lot of strife for them. Hezday, as the recipient of a lot of physical and emotional abuse from his parents, finds solace with the River Nuke. For days at a time, he would go there and just watch the waters, meditating and praying. In this way, he develops a relationship with the goddess Tule, who feels bad for Hezday's sorry state. This goes on for a long time, and by the time Hezday is 26, he's still living with his parents for two main reasons. The first is that he just can't escape his poverty for whatever reason. The second is that he feels he would be a bad person if he left his 7 younger siblings alone with their parents, because he's the one doing the most to care for them while his parents do whatever it is they do. So, one night it begins to rain, and Hezday goes to the river again. He sees the face of Tule form in the river, and he bows and asks how he can be of service. She compliments him on how faithful and devout he is to the gods, even through his horrible life, and she invites him up to Omet. Hezday freaks out and frantically asks if he's gonna die, and if so, who would take care of his siblings. Tule calms him down, saying that, on the contrary, he will be reborn. Hezday goes back home and goes to sleep, where he is whisked away to Omet. Hezday finds himself standing in the middle of the throne room, surrounded by almost all the gods, probably not Dazgari though. Yamashet starts talking to him, saying that the gods have convened and wish to bestow a great honor to him, one they've never given to any other mortal. For the reason that every king has so far been unable to tend to both political and religious matters equally, it's necessary for a new office to be established to separate the two and make it easier to handle. While looking for the right person for the job, Tule actually suggests Hezday. Yamashet compliments Hezday too, telling him that he's definitely earned the job. Yamashet then tells Hezday what he is to do the next day. He will approach the clergy at the Temple of Murid and tell them that he's the new prophet. Yamashet says they won't believe him, of course, and will demand a miracle. The first two they suggest won't be possible, but the third will be. Hezday agrees and then wakes up, spending the rest of the night rehearsing for the next day. The next day arrives and Hezday finds the top clergy at the temple. He tells them that he's had a revelation he wishes to speak with them about. He explains the whole thing and, just like Yamashet said, they don't believe him. They actually start making fun of him and approaching him menacingly, like they're going to take his lunch money or something. But one of them stops the other two and says, well, if you're really the next prophet, show us a miracle. Hezday agrees and allows them to choose. The first clergyman tells Hezday to tell the gods to soak the puddles from last night's rain into the ground. Hezday recognizes that this is the first impossible task, and calmly explains to the seasoned clergyman that, since the ground is the corpse of Aronach, it is not the god's domain. They grumble for a while before the second clergyman demands that Lidam Nur, the god of wealth, give them all a bunch of free money. Hezday tries not to laugh out loud as he says Lidam Nur isn't stupid. The priest finally speaks up, asking for Luvi to reverse the course of the sun. The priest actually takes a stab at Luvi here, because he says, surely the Lord of Intelligence can devise a way to turn his horse around. Hezday prays, and the clergyman watches the sun reverse his course, and they fall to their knees and bow to Hezday. Hezday stops him and says, "Hey boys, I'm not a god, I just speak to them for you." Not the smartest priests, if you've noticed. So, having convinced his local leadership, Hezday goes on to be recognized by the nation as the first prophet, choosing a successor a year later. The position of successor is called the high priest, and he chooses a junior clergyman from the Temple of Nulesh named Puzdu. So now we shift from the part of the text that talks about his life to the part that talks about his accomplishments. There are two big things he's known for, aside from establishing the prophethood: the Hezdaic law and the Kupvuk. The Hezdaic law is an addition to the Code of Aule, a legal code that had been put in place by Aule himself several hundred years before. Hezday divided his code into three parts: the Commoner's Code, the King's Code, and the Prophet's Code, outlining moral requirements of every Miran and additional requirements for royalty and the prophet. One of the clauses for the prophet was the prohibition of living in luxury. In Hezday's eyes, a prophet can't be a good prophet if there is a wealth disparity between him and the people he's supposed to be serving. And just that, serving. The prophet shouldn't profit off of the people he serves. King Hezday I instantly adopts this new moral code, heralding it as a new standard of conduct for the civilized. The Kupvuk, on the other hand, is technically Hezday's writing, but Puzdu's doing. After Hezday died in 325 LM, Puzdu was going through his stuff to sort things out and help clean out his house when he found stacks of old journals. Since paper hadn't been invented yet, it was all written on thin wooden planks, so Puzdu had quite a bit to sort through. He read through them and found Hezday's thoughts written out straight from the first prophet himself. He had written most of these while still living under his parents' roof. The wooden journals consisted of theological ponderings, Hezday's thoughts on his relationship with his parents, Tule, and his siblings, and the appalling apostasy of Miran citizens. Puzdu selected passages he deemed pertinent to Hezday's life and stuff that could be used to reinforce doctrine, and he compiled them into a new book called the Kupvuk, which is early New Korean for mouth. So, that's the life of the first prophet and his major accomplishments. He never had any children, but Puzdu was basically a son to him, and Hezday treated him much better than his parents treated him, although that's not exactly hard to do. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this look into Miran theology and the life of the first prophet. If you have any questions or comments, you know where to leave them, and I'll see you all in the next one.